The crystal chandelier above our table at the Signature Room in Chicago felt like it was mocking me, its expensive glow reflecting off the pristine white tablecloth and the $200 bottles of wine I had just paid for. I sat there, Arthur, a 65-year-old retired structural engineer, feeling like an invisible ghost at my own daughter's engagement dinner. My daughter Chloe was laughing, a sharp artificial sound she'd picked up since she started running with the city's elite. Across from her sat Julian, her fiancé, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, and 4 of their high society friends who had spent the last hour discussing Aspen, polo matches, and things my calloused hands had never touched. I reached for my water glass, my fingers trembling slightly from the exhaustion of a 35-year career in construction. As I moved, I accidentally brushed against Julian's silk sleeve. He didn't just pull away, he recoiled as if I were a smudge of dirt on his perfect life. That was the moment the atmosphere shifted from cold to cruel. One of Chloe's bridesmaids leaned in, her voice dripping with mock curiosity, and whispered, "Chloe, is your father going to give a speech at the wedding? It'll be so quaint to have a builder speak in front of the senator's family." Chloe didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. She just took a long, slow sip of her vintage champagne, looked her friend dead in the eye, and sighed with a heavy, performative weariness. "Don't mind him, darling," she said, her voice carrying a coldness that froze the blood in my veins. "He's just a burden I have to carry until the wedding is over. Once the $500,000 is settled and the last check is signed, Julian and I have other plans for his retirement. For now, he's just the silent bank account at the end of the table." The table erupted in polite, cruel snickers. I sat frozen, my hand still hovering near the glass. The $500,000 wedding check, the one she had begged me for while crying about her dream day, was tucked safely in my breast pocket right against my heart. But as I looked at my daughter's cold, expectant face, I felt that heart turn to stone. I didn't argue. I didn't cause a scene. I simply stood up, tucked my chair in with the precision of an engineer, and walked out of that restaurant into the cold Chicago night. The burden, I realized, was about to become much lighter, for me, not for her. The cold Chicago wind whipped around me as I walked toward the train station, but I barely felt it. The word burden was a sharper blade than any winter gust off Lake Michigan. To understand why those words felt like a death sentence, you have to understand the 35 years that led up to that dinner. You have to understand what it looks like when a man pours his entire soul into a vessel that turns out to be cracked. I spent my life as a structural engineer. People hear the word engineer and they think of clean blueprints and quiet offices. But I was the man in the field. I was the one standing on narrow iron beams 50 stories above the pavement, the skeleton of the city rising around me while the wind tried to throw me off. My hands are a map of that life. The knuckles are permanently swollen from the cold, and there's a scar across my left palm from a cable snap that almost took my hand in '98. Every ache in my lower back is a reminder of the 12-hour shifts I pulled year after year, just to make sure my family never knew the meaning of the word struggle. When Chloe was born, I made a silent promise to my wife, Martha. I told her that our daughter would have the world. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, the same house I still live in today, but Chloe was always meant for bigger things, or at least that's what I told myself. The first major test came when the acceptance letter from that Ivy League university in New York arrived. I remember the glow on Chloe's face. I also remember the sinking feeling in my stomach when I saw the tuition schedule. It wasn't just expensive, it was predatory. I could have told her to take out loans. I could have suggested a state school with a solid program. But Martha was gone by then, taken by a sudden illness that left me hollow, and I felt I had to be both parents for Chloe. I had to fulfill every dream she had. I sold my 1969 Shelby Mustang, the car I had spent a decade restoring in my garage, just to cover her first 2 semesters. I never told her. I told her I'd grown tired of the maintenance and preferred a sensible truck. For 4 years, I didn't take a single day off. No vacations, no new clothes, no luxury of any kind. While my friends were retiring and moving to Florida, I was taking on extra consulting work at night, my eyes blurring over technical drawings until 2 in the morning. I lived on black coffee and canned soup so Chloe could have the best experience. I thought I was building her a future. I didn't realize I was building her a pedestal from which she would eventually look down on me. After graduation, the requests didn't stop. They just changed shape. "Dad, I can't live in a boring suburb," she'd say, her voice already taking on that polished, distant tone. "The networking happens in the city. If I want to be a top marketing executive, I need to be where the power is." So I helped her. I funded the deposit on a luxury apartment in the Gold Coast area, a place with a doorman and a view of the water. I paid half her rent for 3 years because her entry-level executive salary barely covered her social obligations. I watched her buy $800 shoes and $3,000 handbags while I was still wearing the same work boots I'd bought 5 years prior. I told myself it was an investment in her success. I convinced myself that her arrogance was just professional confidence. Then came Julian. He was the final piece of the puzzle Chloe was trying to assemble, a life that had no room for a father with grease under his fingernails. Julian came from a family of lawyers and politicians, people who used words as weapons and viewed everyone else as tools. When they got engaged, Chloe didn't come to me with a heart full of love. She came with a demand. "Dad, I found the venue," she said, sliding a glossy brochure for a high-end Chicago ballroom across my kitchen table. "It's $150,000 just for the space. With the catering, the flowers, the designer dress, and the open bar for 300 guests, the total is going to be about $500,000. I felt the room spin. "Chloe, that's everything. That's my entire retirement fund. That's the money I have left to live on." She didn't blink. She used the one weapon she knew would work. "Mom always said she wanted me to have a princess wedding, Dad. This is her dream too. Julian's parents are inviting the city's elite. You don't want me to look like a charity case in front of them, do you? You don't want to embarrass me?" I looked at her, searching for the little girl who used to help me rake leaves, the one who used to draw pictures of our family holding hands. She wasn't there. In her place was a woman who saw her father as a utility, like a water heater or a furnace, something that was only noticed when it stopped providing what was needed. I signed the first set of checks. I told myself it was the last thing I would ever have to do for her. I thought that once she was married to Julian, she would be settled, and I could finally rest my aching bones. I was willing to live the rest of my life in my drafty old house, counting pennies for groceries if it meant she was happy. But tonight, at that table, the veil finally fell. Hearing her laugh with Julian about how I was a burden she had to carry until the checks cleared, it was the most honest thing she'd said in years. She wasn't waiting for the wedding to start her life. She was waiting for the wedding to finish off mine. I sat on the train, the $500,000 final wedding check still in my pocket. It felt heavy, not like paper, but like a lead weight. She thought she was playing me. She thought I was too simple to understand their other plans for my retirement. She thought the builder didn't know how to read the cracks in the foundation. She was wrong. I've spent 35 years making sure buildings don't collapse. And now, it was time to let hers fall. The week following that disastrous dinner wasn't any better. In fact, the disrespect didn't just linger, it moved into my house. Julian started spending more time at my place, supposedly to coordinate the wedding logistics, but it felt more like a hostile takeover. He walked through my hallways with a permanent look of distaste, as if the very air in a retired engineer's home was too thick with the scent of common labor for his refined lungs. One Tuesday afternoon, I was in the kitchen fixing a leak under the sink, a simple job for a man who had built skyscrapers, but my back was giving me trouble. I was covered in a bit of grime, my old work shirt damp with sweat. Julian walked in, looking like a page out of a luxury magazine in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He didn't ask if I needed help. He didn't even acknowledge the work I was doing to maintain the roof over his head. "Arthur," he said, clicking his tongue as he looked at my toolbox. "We're having a pre-wedding meeting here tomorrow. My parents are flying in from Connecticut. They're very particular. High class, traditional, the whole 9 yards. I wiped my hands on a rag and stood up, my joints popping. "It's good to meet them, Julian. I'll make sure we have a nice spread. I was thinking of grilling some." He cut me off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. No, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. My parents aren't grilling people, Arthur. They expect a certain atmosphere. When they're here, I need you to play a specific role. Or better yet, maybe it's best if you just stay in the back or head out to a movie for a few hours. I felt a cold prickle of anger. "This is my house, Julian. Why would I hide in the back for my own daughter's future in-laws? Julian stepped closer, using his height to try and intimidate me, much like the men I'd seen in the sources who think money equals power. Look, let's be honest. You're a builder. You talk about blueprints and concrete. My father is a corporate litigator. There's a gap there, Arthur, a social gap. We want this this marriage, to start on the right foot. We don't want them thinking Chloe comes from humble beginnings. It would be easier if you were just the silent investor behind the scenes. Before I could respond, Chloe walked in, carrying a stack of bridal magazines. She saw the tension but didn't even hesitate. She walked straight to Julian's side, tucking her arm into his as if they were a united front against a common enemy. "Dad, Julian's right," she said, her voice airy and devoid of any warmth for me. "His parents are coming from a world of old money and prestige. They don't really understand blue-collar success. If you're here, you'll just talk about your construction stories and embarrass me. Can't you just go to that hardware store you like or visit your old friends at the site for a day?" "Embarrass you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The blue-collar success you're talking about is what's paying for your $5,000 designer shoes, Chloe. It's what's paying for the very venue Julian's parents are going to be sitting in." Chloe rolled her eyes, a gesture she'd perfected lately. Oh God, here we go again with the "I worked so hard" speech. "Dad, that was your choice. But right now, my future is on the line. Julian's family has connections that can skyrocket my career. I need to look the part. And having a father who looks like that," she gestured to my grease-stained shirt, "doesn't fit the brand we're building." "Brand?" I asked. "I thought we were building a family." Julian laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Family is a brand, Arthur, and yours is outdated. Just do us a favor and stay out of the way. When the guests arrive, act like the help or don't act at all. As long as the check's clear, that's all we really need from you." They walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with a wrench in my hand and a hole in my heart. They didn't see me as a father. They didn't even see me as a human being. I was just a utility, a silent, reliable bank account that was supposed to provide the life they wanted, and then disappear when the important people arrived. I looked at the wrench in my hand. I had spent my life fixing things, building structures that could withstand the fiercest Chicago storms. But I realized then that no matter how much I tried to reinforce it, the relationship with my daughter was a bridge that had already collapsed. I was just the only one who had bothered to look at the wreckage. The silence in my own home had started to feel like a trap. After that afternoon in the kitchen, I retreated to my small basement workshop, the only place in this house that still felt like it belonged to me. The smell of sawdust and old grease usually calmed my nerves, but today the air felt heavy. I was sitting on my workbench staring at a set of blueprints from a project I'd finished 10 years ago, wondering how I'd been so precise with steel and concrete, yet so blind when it came to my own flesh and blood. I heard the front door slam upstairs. Chloe and Julian were back. I heard their footsteps on the hardwood, the same floorboards I'd meticulously refinished for Chloe's homecoming from college. Usually, I would have gone up to see if they wanted dinner, but I stayed put. Something told me to stay in the shadows. Their voices carried through the heating vents with terrifying clarity. It's a quirk of old houses. They hold no secrets. "I'm telling you, Chloe, we can't keep doing this." Julian's voice was sharp, echoing the same arrogance he'd shown earlier. "The man is an eyesore. My parents were horrified just thinking about having to sit through a dinner with him. Did you see his hands? He looked like he'd just crawled out of a coal mine." "I know, baby, I know," Chloe replied, her voice lacking even a hint of the defensive warmth a daughter should have. It was embarrassing. But just look at the bigger picture. We're only 2 weeks away. The venue is booked, the catering is set, and most importantly, I have the final check for the remaining $500,000 tucked away in his office. We just need him to hand it over." "And then what?" Julian snapped. "We get married, we have this big fancy party, and then we're stuck coming back here to visit Dad in this dumpy suburb. This house is worth a fortune given the recent market spike. We could easily pull $900,000 for this lot alone." I felt my breath hitch. They were talking about my home, the home where Martha's spirit still lingered in every corner. "Don't worry," Chloe said, and I could practically hear the smirk in her voice. "I've already looked into the paperwork for the Autumn Leaves facility. It's a state-funded nursing home out past Aurora. It's not luxury, But it's clean enough for him. He's been complaining about his back and his joints anyway. We'll just tell him he needs professional care for his own safety. He's so desperate for my approval that he'll sign the power of attorney without even reading it." "A state-funded home?" Julian laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "That's a bit far out, isn't it?" "It's perfect," Chloe continued, her voice cold and calculated. "It's far enough that we won't have to visit more than once a year, and once he's settled there, we sell this place immediately. That money, combined with the leftover wedding funds, will be our down payment for that cabin in Aspen we saw. Can you imagine? Skiing in the winters, away from all this blue-collar grime." "You're brilliant, Chloe," Julian said. "But what if he realizes the $500,000 isn't just for the wedding? What if he checks the accounts?" "He won't," she said dismissively. "He thinks he's being a provider. He thinks he's fulfilling Mom's wish. He's so caught up in his noble sacrifice that he doesn't see he's just a line item in our budget. Honestly, Julian, he's a burden, a heavy, rusting anchor that I've been dragging around for 30 years. I'm ready to be free. Once that wedding is over and the house is sold, we never have to look at a hard hat or a structural blueprint again." I sat there in the dark, the sawdust on my workbench suddenly looking like the remains of my life. Every word was a hammer blow to my soul. I thought about the Shelby Mustang I'd sold. I thought about the double shifts, the frozen fingers on iron beams, the missed meals, and the years I'd spent wearing old boots so she could wear the latest trends. I hadn't been building her a future, I had been funding my own disposal. The burden. She'd used that word again. To her, my life's work wasn't a legacy, it was a liquidation sale. They weren't planning a marriage, they were planning a heist. They were waiting for me to break down so they could pick the pockets of my corpse while I was still breathing. I looked at my hands. They were scarred, yes, they were calloused. They were grimy in the eyes of a man like Julian who had never done a day's work in his life. But these hands had built the very walls that were currently sheltering their treachery. These hands had earned every cent they were so eagerly waiting to steal. Upstairs, I heard them clinking glasses, probably celebrating their Aspen dream with the expensive wine I'd bought. "To the wedding," Julian toasted. "To our new life," Chloe replied. "And to finally dropping the weight." The weight. That was me. A strange thing happens when you realize the person you love most in the world sees you as an obstacle to be cleared. The pain doesn't stay as a dull ache. It turns into a sharp, cold clarity. The fog of fatherly duty that had blinded me for decades finally evaporated. I wasn't an anchor. I was the foundation. And as any structural engineer will tell you, if you sabotage the foundation, the entire building comes down. I waited until I heard them go to their rooms, their laughter fading into the quiet of the night. I stood up, my joints no longer feeling like a protest but like a coiled spring. I walked over to my desk and pulled out that $500,000 check. I looked at it for a long time. This wasn't a gift, it was an exit fee. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I simply reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for the venue manager and the high-end caterers. I looked at the clock. 11:30 p.m. Tomorrow morning, the bank would open at 9 a.m. Chloe wanted a princess wedding to impress the elite. Julian wanted a merger of status and cash. They both wanted me in a state-funded room where they could forget I ever existed. They thought they knew me. They thought I was the simple builder who would sign anything for a smile. They forgot one thing about engineers. We know exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it reaches its breaking point. And they had just pushed me past mine. I tucked the check back into my pocket. Tomorrow wasn't going to be about sacrifice. Tomorrow was going to be about accountability. The burden was finally going to be dropped, but it wouldn't be me who fell. The sun rose over Lake Michigan the next morning, casting a pale, indifferent light across my kitchen floor. For the first time in decades, I didn't wake up with the weight of to-do lists for Chloe. I woke up with a blueprint for demolition. As an engineer, I knew that you don't just knock a building down, you find the load-bearing points, the places where the structure is most vulnerable, and you remove the support. Chloe and Julian had spent months building a fantasy life on the foundation of my bank account. Today I was going to pull the permit. I started at the kitchen table, the same place where Chloe had wept and manipulated me into signing those checks. I had a yellow legal pad and a pen. I listed every single vendor, every deposit made, and every contract signed. My mind was clear, my hand steady. The $500,000 final wedding check sat on the table, staring at me. In Chloe's mind, this was the money that would buy her the status she craved. In reality, it was now the seed money for my freedom. At 9 a.m. sharp, I was at the First National Bank of Chicago. I'd known the manager there, a man named Marcus, for 20 years. He'd helped me set up Chloe's college fund and later, the wedding account she had access to. "Arthur, good to see you," Marcus said, leading me into his office. "Coming in to finalize that last transfer for the big day?" "Not exactly, Marcus," I said, my voice calm. "I need to close the wedding account. Every cent in it is to be transferred to a new private account in my name only. I also want to revoke Chloe's status as an authorized user on all my credit cards. Immediately." Marcus looked surprised, his eyebrows shooting up toward his receding hairline. "Arthur, that's a major change. Is everything okay?" "Everything is finally becoming clear," I replied. I didn't offer details. In my world, you don't talk about the cracks until you've already fixed the structure. I watched the screen as Marcus clicked through the files. One by one, the digital tethers Chloe had on my life were severed. The wedding fund, which still held nearly $200,000 of my savings, vanished from her view and settled into a secure vault where she couldn't touch it. "It's done," Marcus said, handing me a confirmation slip. "The accounts are locked. No one but you can touch a dime." "Thank you, Marcus. Now let's talk about the house." I spent the next hour ensuring that my home, the one Chloe and Julian were already planning to sell, was legally ironclad. I placed the property into a private trust, making it impossible for anyone to sell it or claim power of attorney over it without a lengthy legal process that involved my own trusted lawyer, David Vance. I left the bank feeling lighter, but the real work was just beginning. I drove to my lawyer's office downtown. David had been my friend since we were both struggling in our 20s. He listened in grim silence as I told him about the burden conversation and the plan for the state-funded nursing home. "They really said that?" David asked, his voice low with anger. "In your own home?" "They did, and they think I'm too senile to understand." I leaned forward. "I want the will changed, David. Chloe gets nothing. I want a trust set up for a trade school scholarship for kids from the neighborhood. I want my money to go to people who actually want to build things, not people who only know how to tear them down." "I'll have the documents ready by this afternoon," David promised. "What about the wedding?" "That," I said with a small, cold smile, "is something I'll handle personally." The next few hours were a masterclass in methodical cancellation. I sat in my truck in a quiet parking lot and started making the calls. First, the venue, the Crystal Plaza. I spoke to the manager, Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, this is Arthur. I'm the primary payer for the wedding of Chloe and Julian. I'm calling to inform you that the final payment will not be forthcoming. In fact, I am canceling the reservation effective immediately." "But Mr. Flores," Sterling stammered, "the wedding is in 10 days. The cancellation fee is—" "I'm well aware of the contract, Sterling. Keep the deposit I've already paid, but do not expect another dollar. And under no circumstances is the event to proceed. If they show up, they are to be turned away at the door. I'll send a formal letter from my lawyer within the hour." Next, the caterer. $60,000 for a 7-course meal including beluga caviar and vintage champagne. I canceled it. The florist? $30,000 for rare orchids flown in from South America. Canceled. The private orchestra? Canceled. The luxury limousine service? Canceled. With each call, I felt a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't just saving money. I was reclaiming the 35 years of sweat and toil that money represented. Every time a vendor asked, "Does your daughter know?" I simply replied, "She'll find out when the structure fails, not a moment before." The most difficult call was the one I didn't make. I didn't call Chloe. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I stayed in the house, playing the part of the grateful, silent bank account. When she came home that evening, she was bubbling with excitement about her final dress fitting. "Oh, Dad, Julian's parents are so impressed with the venue," she gushed, barely looking at me as she poured herself a glass of my expensive wine. "They say it's the most exclusive place they've ever been to. You really outdid yourself." "I'm glad they're impressed, Chloe," I said, my voice steady. I was sitting in my old armchair, watching her like an engineer watches a bridge with a fatal flaw. "You know it's going to collapse, you just wait for the exact moment the load becomes too heavy." Did you sign the final check for the caterer? She asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Mr. Rossi said he hasn't seen the transfer yet. I took care of everything, Chloe, I said. It wasn't a lie. I had taken care of it by ensuring Mr. Rossi would never receive it. Good, she said dismissively. Oh, and Julian says we need to look at some papers for your transition after the honeymoon. Just some medical stuff to make sure you're safe. You don't mind, do you? I don't mind at all, I replied. I've been thinking a lot about my future lately. I think I've finally found exactly where I belong. She smiled then, a thin, triumphant smile that didn't reach her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought the burden was successfully packed and ready for the warehouse. She had no idea that while she was picking out bridesmaids' gifts, I had already sold the apartment she was living in, which was in my name, canceled her health insurance, and moved my entire life into a secure, private trust. As I lay in bed that night, the house felt quiet. Not the lonely quiet I'd felt since Martha died, but a peaceful, expectant quiet. I thought about the bridge I'd built for Chloe over the years. I had reinforced it with everything I had, my health, my youth, my savings, my love, but she had stripped the gears and rusted the cables with her greed. A structure that can't hold the weight of basic respect is a danger to everyone involved. Tomorrow was the wedding day. Chloe would wake up thinking she was becoming a princess. Julian would wake up thinking he was marrying into a fortune. And I would wake up, have a cup of coffee, and watch the entire $500,000 fantasy crumble into the Chicago dirt. The burden wasn't mine anymore. I had handed it back to the people who created it. The morning of the wedding arrived with a clear, mocking blue sky. Chicago was at its most beautiful, but for Chloe and Julian, it was supposed to be the coronation of their social ascent. I woke up at 6 a.m., but I didn't reach for a suit or a tie. I sat on my back porch with a mug of coffee, watching a pair of sparrows build a nest in the old oak tree. I felt a profound sense of peace, the kind of peace that only comes when you finally cleared the rot out of a structure. My phone started buzzing around 10 a.m. It was Chloe. I didn't answer. Then came the texts, a frantic stream of consciousness. Dad, where are you? The hair and makeup team is here. Why haven't you sent the car? Julian is trying to call the venue to check on the floral delivery, but they aren't picking up. I sipped my coffee. I knew exactly why they weren't picking up. Mr. Sterling at the Crystal Plaza was a man of his word, and a legal letter from David Vance had a way of making people very cooperative. By 1 p.m., the burden was about to hit the ground. I decided to drive toward the city, not to the venue, but to a small park across the street from the Crystal Plaza. I wanted to see the moment the fantasy collapsed. I sat on a bench wearing my old work jacket and a baseball cap, looking like any other retired man enjoying the sun. A fleet of black town cars pulled up to the ornate entrance of the plaza. Chloe stepped out, looking every bit the princess she had demanded to be. Her dress, a $15,000 masterpiece of silk and lace that I was supposed to have paid for, trailed behind her. Julian followed, looking smug in his custom tuxedo, flanked by his elite parents. They marched toward the grand doors with the confidence of people who owned the world. But the doors didn't open. 2 large security guards stood like stone pillars in front of the entrance. I saw Julian say something, gesturing grandly with his hands. Then Mr. Sterling stepped out, holding a clipboard. Even from across the street, I could see the shift in their body language. The confidence evaporated, replaced by frantic pointing and raised voices. Chloe's bridesmaids arrived in another car, spilling out in a cloud of pastel chiffon, only to be met with the sight of the bride screaming at a venue manager. Julian's parents looked horrified, their carefully curated dignity crumbling as they realized something was very wrong. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered, "Dad!" Chloe's voice was a jagged shard of glass. "There's been a massive mistake. The manager says the wedding is canceled. He says the payments were revoked. He's telling us to leave the property. Call him right now and fix this. Julian's parents are standing right here, Dad. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" "I know exactly how embarrassing it is, Chloe," I said, my voice as calm as a still lake. "But there's no mistake. I canceled it." The silence on the other end was absolute. For 5 seconds, the only sound was the distant honking of Chicago traffic. "You... what?" she finally whispered. "I canceled it all, Chloe. The venue, the food, the flowers, the music. I even canceled the lease on your apartment this morning. It's in my name, remember? The movers will be there on Monday to put your things in a storage unit. I've already paid the first month for you. Consider it my final gift." "Dad, you can't be serious." Julian's voice broke into the call, shouting over Chloe's shoulder. "We have 300 people coming. My father's partners are on their way. You're going to pay for this, you old senile." "I've already paid, Julian," I interrupted him. "I've paid for 35 years. I've paid with my health, my youth, and my dignity. But the bank is closed now. You wanted me to be a silent bank account and stay out of the way. Well, I'm staying out of the way permanently." "Dad, please." Chloe was sobbing now, but it wasn't the sob of a heartbroken daughter. It was the frantic cry of a spoiled child who had lost her toy. "We'll lose everything. Our reputation, our standing, everything." "Then I guess you'll finally understand what it's like to be a burden," I said. "You and Julian are young. You're elite. You're refined. I'm sure you'll have no trouble building a life without the help of a grimy builder like me." I hung up the phone and turned it off. Across the street, I watched as the scene devolved into pure chaos. Julian's father was arguing with Julian. Chloe was sitting on the steps of the plaza, her $15,000 dress gathering dust on the sidewalk, her face buried in her hands. Their elite friends were whispering and taking photos with their phones. The social climb was over. They hadn't just hit a glass ceiling, they had fallen through the floor. I stood up, stretched my back, and walked toward my truck. For the first time in my life, I wasn't an engineer, a provider, or a bank account. I was just Arthur. And Arthur was going to go buy a steak and enjoy a quiet dinner alone. I spent the next few weeks in a quiet cabin by the edge of a lake in northern Wisconsin. The sound of the wind through the pines was a much better soundtrack than the sharp, artificial laughter of Chicago's high society. I had sold the big house in the suburbs, the one Chloe and Julian were already mentally decorating for their own profit. I didn't need the space anymore, and I certainly didn't need the memories of betrayal that now soaked into the floorboards like a permanent stain. With the $500,000 wedding fund and the proceeds from the house sale safely tucked into a private trust, I finally had what I had been working for all my life: genuine, unburdened security. I didn't completely cut myself off from the news. I kept one ear to the ground through my old friend and lawyer, David. He told me the fallout was exactly what I had predicted: a total structural collapse. Julian's parents, horrified by the public scandal and the non-payment embarrassment at the Crystal Plaza, had essentially disowned him. In their world of old money and prestige, nothing is more unforgivable than being publicly exposed as a fraud. Without their support and without my bank account, Julian's sophisticated lifestyle turned into a pile of overdue bills and repossession notices within a month. As for Chloe, the reports were even more devastating. She had tried to sue the venue, then she tried to sue me, but David's ironclad documentation of her burden comments and the legal revocation of the gift meant she didn't have a single leg to stand on. She had been forced to move out of her Gold Coast apartment after I stopped the rent payments. David heard she was now living in a cramped one-bedroom unit on the outskirts of the city, working 12-hour shifts at a mid-level agency just to keep her head above water. For the first time in her life, she was actually working to pay for her own designer shoes. I looked out over the water, my scarred, calloused hands wrapped around a mug of hot coffee. I felt a faint twinge of sadness, the kind any father would feel for a lost relationship, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of profound relief. I had spent 35 years carrying her on my back, allowing myself to be treated as a utility rather than a father. I had taught her that love was a transaction where she received and I gave. By finally saying no, I had given her the only thing of real value she had ever received from me: accountability. The lesson was simple, though it cost $500,000 to deliver. Respect isn't something you can buy with a check, and family isn't a bank you can rob until it's empty. It's a structure built on mutual support. If she ever wants to see me again, she'll have to build that bridge herself, one honest day at a time. I set my mug down and smiled at the sunset. I was no longer an anchor, and I was certainly no longer a burden. I was just Arthur, and for the first time in 40 years, I was finally home.